All right, everybody, welcome to your own book show on this, what day is it? God. We're at OCON, so all days fuzz into one, and it's hard to keep track of everything. I think it's Wednesday because I'm speaking tomorrow on optimism. So tune in to what your own book has to say about optimism. Everybody in the conference is asking me, "You're optimistic, Yaron?" That's new. How could that be? Nothing good is happening in the world. Oh wait, you'll have to find out tomorrow what I think about the state of the world from an optimistic perspective. Let's see. I think today's the last show we're doing from OCON. We will. Somebody's already left, just walked out. I only started and already just walked out. We've got a small live audience here, so when you guys leave the show online, I can't see it. Like the numbers keep fluctuating a little bit, but I don't see it. But with a live show, somebody, they pull a face and they walk. No, he got a phone call. I have a feeling he's coming back. Today's the last show from OCON. I was supposed to do a show a couple of days ago, but things got screwed up here logistically. So next show will be probably Saturday from home, Saturday and Sunday. The assumption, of course, is that I don't get COVID in the next couple of days. Everybody here is getting COVID. There's like a little COVID pandemic hitting OCON. I think with 10, 12, 14, something like that already. So here's the lesson, guys. If you wake up with a sore throat, don't come to the conference and tell everybody you've got a sore throat. Go check for COVID. Sore throat is the number one symptom of. So somebody came up to me today and said, really close. I said, I've got a sore throat. I said, get away from here. Go. I don't want your COVID. Yes. Oh, Jonathan, thank you for the support. Jonathan says, thank you, Ron, for an amazing conference and your tireless advocacy for reason and Iron Man's genius. I appreciate that. Today I want to talk about, we did, over lunch today, there was a lunch where we taped the Iron Man Institute's podcast, which its name I forget now, and we talked about the state of the culture, and it was a lot of fun. We had on stage, we had Ankar Gate, Greg Salmieri, Tara Smith, and myself. And the four of us kind of riffed off of what is going on in the world. And so, as I said at that lunch, I'm going to be as pessimistic as I can, so that tomorrow I can flip to being optimistic. So I couldn't say anything positive during the lunch because I'd give it away. A topic came out which I thought was really interesting. It's something that particularly Ankar and I have been talking about for a long time, but other people we've been talking about, and that is the significance of 9/11 to what's happening today. And 9/11 is, I think, in American history, in modern American history, is a key event, is a pivotal event, and I think to a large extent is shaping the world in which we live today. And I want to go over some of the ways in which that manifests itself, and some of the consequences that I think have come about because of 9/11 and kind of the response to 9/11. Because it's really, I think the pivot is not so much 9/11. I think the real impact on the culture is how our political class responded to 9/11, how the culture responded to 9/11. And that has really paved its way to what we're experiencing now. So let's talk about that. I'll remind everybody you can ask questions on pretty much anything. I'm known to answer questions on pretty much anything. And to do that, you can use the Super Chat feature on YouTube. It's just a button at the bottom there. It's easy to do. You can also use that to support the show and to support what I do. These funds make the show possible. All right. Really, what they do is they make it possible for me to devote the time I need for the show, because the setup doesn't cost that much money. What costs money is my time. So let's talk about 9/11. So we'll divvy it up into a number of different buckets. So let's start with the idea that to this day, it is a complete and utter mystery to our political and to some extent our cultural elites who actually attacked us in 9/11. I don't think there's any conception of who that is. There's this vague notion that it was terrorists, but that's about it. Terrorists attacked us on 9/11, and as a consequence, we need to fight terrorism. We're the terrorists. It's really interesting because it's the first, maybe not the first big lie, but certainly it's the big lie that has defined kind of our culture, I think, in the 21st century. If you, after 9/11, suggested, as many of us did, that maybe Islam had something to do with it, oh no, God forbid, no. George Bush invites Muslim imams to the White House to celebrate the Ramadan a month after 9/11, right, in October of 2001, in his famous speech to a joint session of Congress. Islam is a religion of peace. God forbid you mention the term Islam. Now think about that in the context of conspiracy theories. Now everybody knew they were Muslim, right? All of them, every single one of the terrorists. And that Islam was not an accidental feature of the attack, that indeed the attack was done in the name of Islam. But it wasn't even, our politicians couldn't even say it's radical Islam, militant Islam. I mean, we gave them a million different terms that they could use. We used the term totalitarian Islam, Islamists, jihadists, something that would link this to the religion, God forbid. And it was, God forbid, because remember, George Bush was religious, and of course the left didn't want to insult anybody, that, and the right is religious. They don't want to blame religion. All religions are peace. All those millions of people who've died in religious wars, terrorists. Was it warriors? It's wars. God forbid. Again, you can't name religion as the source, as the cause, as the motivation for any atrocity that's ever happened. So what you get is this silence, and you're not allowed to say certain things, and you're canceled if you do say certain things. And if you think about the first protests on campuses of speakers, I remember being with, I don't think they were protesting me as much, but I was with Daniel Pipes. I did a lot of events in those days. I don't know if you guys know who Daniel Pipes was, but Daniel Pipes of the Mideast Forum was excellent after 9/11 as an analysis and his analysis of what happened. Not quite as good as the Ayn Institute, but really, really good. And we would do events with him, but he was known as, the so-called Islamophobe. Notice Islamophobe. You're afraid of Muslims, so you blame on everything. What a bizarre term. But the demonstrations, the attempts to silence. I was attacked more by people after 9/11 in talks that I gave all over the country, interrupted, attacked, than I ever was by Antifa or in more modern times by the modern left. In Irvine, I gave a talk. I can't remember what year it was, maybe 6 or 7. Literally, they stormed the stage. A bunch of them spent the night in jail. Luckily, I had really good security. The Irvine police were there, and they clamped down on these guys, and they put them in handcuffs, and they immediately whizzed them off. So these guys were prepared. But it was scary in those days. I don't know how often I've said this, but I don't know if you guys know, but I used to wear bulletproof vest in the post 9/11 when I used to talk about foreign policy stuff. That's how, because we would get death threats. Again, people would demonstrate and threaten and in all kinds of ways. And so my wife and my chief administrative officer at the Ayn Institute insisted that I wear a bulletproof vest. So I accommodated their wishes. I would travel all over the world with a bulletproof vest when I spoke on terrorism, foreign policy, morality of war, Israel, all of those things. It was one of these you were understood, so most people couldn't tell. So if you look at the video, you won't be able to tell. But security guys would always tell. They would look at me and say, "You're wearing a vest, right?" And the answer was yes. So given the death threats, given the attacks, much worse than anything we've experienced since then, Ilan, I mean, the threats he got over what? Over identifying Islam as a source of the 9/11 attacks. I mean, they were going to, decapitate him and his family. I mean, it was scary. It was scary at the Institute in the first 10 years after 9/11. And of course, we got no support from the intellectuals, with the exception of people like Daniel Pipes. Think about what happened during the Danish cartoons. Again, many of you are too young to remember the Danish cartoons, but when the Danish cartoons came out, there were demonstrations and riots all over the world. George Bush, in his immense courage, said that, it's inappropriate to publish the cartoons because it's offensive, so we shouldn't really do it. No newspaper in the United States would run the cartoons. They all chickened out. They all were afraid. We went on campuses. We blew the cartoonists out to massive posters. And we went on campuses and put them up on stage behind us and did panels on free speech during the Danish cartoon crisis. Now, I wore a bulletproof vest. And people would freak out. And the universities would freak out. And the universities at NYU, New York University, they allowed us to do the event only if we didn't show the cartoons. And if we only allowed students in, did not allow general public in. So we ended up doing the event with the cartoons in the back all covered with sheets, which was actually more effective because here was the silencing that we were talking about. In some places, wouldn't provide security. They wouldn't protect our right to speak, even though we were legitimate and invited and people were threatening violence. So the whole attitude about there's certain things you can't say. Think about woke culture. Certain things you just can't say. You're offensive to a particular group, Muslims in this case. That got really embedded in American culture around the issue of Islam after 9/11. I don't think there was this attitude. I mean, there was some political correctness in the 90s, but there was no, you can't offend XYZ. You can't say anything to offend them. You can't name certain groups in certain contexts. And if you think about today, you can list all the groups that you can't offend, you can't name, you can't do anything. Right? So, that's one dimension. I think the dimension of speech, self-censorship. Think about how many people in the 2000s started to self-censor, started to talk about terrorists without naming the terrorists, started talking about what motivated them, what drove them. I mean, think about we engaged in multiple wars without ever naming the enemy, refusing to name the enemy. Like, who's there? We're going to Iraq. Why? Because terrorists attacked us on 9/11. What does Iraq have anything to do? Oh, they have weapons of mass destruction. What does that have to do with 9/11? Blank. Nothing. Right? We're going to build democracy in Afghanistan and Iraq. Why? Because we were attacked in 9/11. What does that have? Make the world a safer place. For whom? From whom? Blank. Nothing. And of course, in Iraq, we brought in all the tribal leaders, let them write an Islamist constitution with Islam everywhere in it, and we said nothing. Yeah, whatever you guys want to do, that's fine. You can keep your Islam, because Islam had nothing to do with 9/11, so that's okay. We just happen to attack a bunch of Islamic countries, but we want to preserve Islam. We don't want to do anything about Islam. We just don't worry, be happy. Everything's fine. So everybody, think about a culture where everybody knew Islam had something to do with it, but nobody was willing to say it. All the intellectuals, all the political leaders, all the, quote, elites were silent, refused to talk about it, self-censored. And the rest of the people are looking at this and saying, what the hell? We know what happened. We get what happened. and you won't tell us. And I think it's not the beginning because everything has been building up over decades, but it really is a major step towards the distrust of elites, the distrust of the media, the distrust of our political class, the fact that they're so brazenly lying to us and so brazenly self-censoring and forcing us to self-censor as well. And again, that whole attitude towards the elites, towards our politicians, that has, increased as we've moved into today's culture. It's all over the culture today. So it's two aspects of this came out of 9/11: the self-censorship speech issue and the distrust issue. The distrust issue. We stopped trusting the so-called authorities, the so-called people who supposedly knew what they were doing. This includes our generals, and it includes the entire establishment, would not tell us who actually committed the 9/11. And of course, it continued, right? Because there were terrorist attacks after 9/11, and there were, and there were terrorist attacks before 9/11. There was the Cole, there was others, and never blaming anybody. And of course, Europe is even worse, because there they had more terrorist attacks, at least in terms of numbers. I'm not sure in terms of casualties if they got to the level of 9/11 in terms of percentage of the population. I don't think so, even cumulative. But it was major, right? There was a train in Spain, pretty quickly after 9/11. And then there was a bunch from ISIS later on, and you can never say that this was caused by Muslims. And of course, Europe caved completely to the Danish cartoons, and we saw what happened. What was the other big event with regard to cartoons, right? In France. Charlie Hebdo, right? Charlie Hebdo, remember the terrorists went in, killed all the cartoonists, shot the place up, and everybody went out in the streets. We are Charlie Hebdo. Je suis, Charlie. Remember that? Je suis Charlie. On Twitter, everybody changed their hand to Je suis Charlie. How many of those people showed cartoons? Because if you're Charlie Hebdo, isn't it incumbent on you to show the cartoons? Isn't that what it means to be Charlie Hebdo? Almost nobody. Nobody posted them on Twitter. Nobody posted them on Facebook. Nobody, because you can't offend. Even though they just murdered a bunch of people. And you can't name the religion. You can't name the cause. So that is such a massive betrayal of the American people, the European people. It's such a massive betrayal by the people in charge of all of us. They're supposed to be in charge of protecting us. Our trust in the ability to protect us goes out the door when they won't even name the enemy. They won't even name who attacked us. They refuse to do it. So that's one aspect. I think everything comes from that, in a sense. Because if you don't name the enemy, how do you fight it? You can't. It's a haphazard, uncoordinated, unintegrated attempt to fight a bunch of different groups that you can't tie together because you can't name what ties them together. You leave a lot of groups that are affiliated with the actual event, with radical Islam or Islamic totalitarianism. You leave them free because you can't attack them because they gave you no cause, supposedly, because Islam is not responsible. So you go to Afghanistan, but what are you doing there? What's the purpose? Who are you trying to kill? Are you going after Taliban, or are you just going after Al-Qaeda? And if you're going after both for the purpose of what? What's going to replace the Taliban? Are we going to stay there? Are we going to leave? No answers. Nobody knows. We go to Iraq. What's the connection? Why do we care? Why are American kids dying in Iraq? For whom? For what? What's the connection with the attack? Are we then going to go to Iran, which you could argue, is the origin of the problem? No, they tell us, and no, they didn't. Indeed, they handed Iraq to the Iranians. A complete disastrous policy that led to defeat. We lost Afghanistan. We lost Iraq. 6,000 American kids died for no reason, soldiers in both in both missions. We failed. Somebody says Saudi Arabia. No, Saudi Arabia is our friend. Saudi Arabia is our ally. Oh, but it's Saudi Arabia's ideology that fuels the terrorists? Well, but you can't say that. There is no ideology. They're just terrorists. That's it. It's no ideology. So we can't blame the Saudis, and we can't go after the Saudis, and 16 of the terrorists were Saudis. Oh, that doesn't matter. Just accident. Just happened to be from Saudi Arabia. They could have been from, New Guinea, right? They could have been from anywhere. So Saudi's our friend. It's an ally in the war on terrorism, because it's just terrorism. So the American defeat, and we should call it a defeat, in Iraq and in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, by basically the worst elements within Islam, has infected our culture with, multiple things. One, no self-esteem. America is no longer exceptional. There's nothing special about America. The wars are not just because they're never explained. So we're just like Russia invading Ukraine. I see that all the time from conservatives and liberals. Putin's not particularly bad. He's not worse than America. America went into Iraq. He's going into Ukraine. What's the difference? There's no difference, right? And since it was never explained, since it was never justified, and since we left it a bigger mess than when we came, arguably, what is the difference? Afghanistan, what did we do there? Nothing. Taliban was there before. Taliban is there now. Spent 20 years there and did zilch, nothing, except get a lot of Americans killed. I reviewed on my show a few months ago, years ago, I can't tell, the movie Outpost. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Outpost. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic movie that illustrates, it's a true story, based on a true story of an outpost in Afghanistan. The utter what's the word? Disregard our politicians and our generals have towards American soldiers. They don't care. They're just fodder. They're just fodder for political games, for diplomatic games, for whatever the generals and the politicians come up with. This is an outpost that there was no reason for American troops to be there, and they were there clearly at a disadvantage versus the Taliban, and they were going to die, and they were going to be killed, and everybody knew it. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. And the movie kind of shows that and shows the battle, and it's heart-wrenching. Your cry of outrage over our politicians and the disregard they had for American lives. They have a lot of disregard for Afghan lives. Lots of regard for Afghan lives. Complete disregard for American lives. Same happened in Iraq. Massive regard for Iraqi lives, complete disregard for American lives. And Americans became cynical about their government, became cynical about foreign policy, became cynical about their own country. We lose a country. We can't win a war. We haven't won a war since World War II. These are primitive, barbaric cultures. We can't even beat them. Why were we even there? What were we trying to achieve? Well, we didn't achieve anything. And everybody knows we didn't achieve anything. And now with Biden retreat, it was perfect. What Biden did was actually perfect. The perfect ending for Afghanistan. Since it was a fiasco from day one, it's appropriate that it's a fiasco at the end. It began as a fiasco, and I don't know if you know this. I've told this story many times over the years. The operation, the bombing of Afghanistan, the original bombing of Afghanistan was called, and the invasion of Afghanistan was called Operation Infinite Justice. And less than 12 hours after the operation began, they changed the name because the Saudis complained. Only Allah can inflict infinite justice. So don't pretend that you have God on your side or something. And the Bush administration changed the name of the operation because the Saudis didn't like it. Because the enemy didn't like it. We only do enemy-friendly names. We don't offend our enemies. We'll bomb them, but we don't want to offend them, right? It's mind-boggling. So the weakness, the groveling, the pathetic nature of the campaign. You know, they had bin Laden in the crosshair a number of times. They didn't shoot because of civilian casualties. They could have wiped out the Taliban from the air, but they wouldn't bomb Kabul because of civilian casualties. There's another movie that I just saw recently about the first Special Forces soldiers who went into Afghanistan to try to capture Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan. And they worked with the warlords. And it was like they're struggling, and carpet bombing is never an option, right? Where it would have saved gazillions of lives of the people, actually, the good guys trying to, but nobody, you couldn't just send missiles into Mazar-e-Sharif and destroy the enemy, because who knows who will die, right? You have to check your targets before you shoot. Otherwise, and if you get shot in while you're checking the targets, so be it, who cares? I think what that did to American culture, what that did to American confidence, what they did to American self-esteem and the sense of life, it's impossible to fully appreciate the damage that the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, the way they were conducted, had done to American culture. Not only has it caused this kind of sensitivity to who you're offending, but it's caused us to lose the idea of anything special about America. If you think about, we associate today with the wars, we associate the neoconservatives. And the neoconservatives are immediately attacked as, oh, they believe in American exceptionalism. I mean, that was Trump's attack against the rest of the Republican Party. It's the attack today of most modern conservatives. Neocons are the ones, they believe in American exceptionalism. And we don't. I mean, I don't agree with neocons. I wrote a whole book attacking neoconservatives with Brad Thompson. But that's not what they're wrong on. They're wrong on a lot of things, but America is exceptional, at least was exceptional. Maybe it's true that it's no more exceptional. But we've lost. I think the only reason that Trump could win is because Trump rejected American exceptionalism. You made a case. I mean, Trump's basic message in this regard was, the world is full of thugs. We're a thug too. We're just American thugs. And says, well, all Americans, let's be patriotic around our thuggery versus everybody else's thuggery. I mean, it really became clear in the campaign, early in the campaign, in the primaries, I think it was still primaries, when in an interview, he was asked about Putin. And why was he so friendly with Putin? Because Trump and Putin had this very close relationship. And this is before he was president. And he was asked why he's so friendly with Putin. Putin is, he murders journalists and he kills his political opponents. And I saw this on television. This is not some quote made up by the mainstream media. And Trump says, yeah, so we kill people too. Everybody kills people. I mean, that's what countries do. We're all thugs. There's no difference. The only reason America's special is because it's America. It's because we were born. This is antagonism to immigrants, right? What counts is where you're born. That makes you an American. And all these countries, and the first president so there have only been two presidents who've rejected American exceptionalism explicitly. Obama, who clearly viewed America as morally equal to the rest of the world, if not inferior to the rest of the world, but was very explicit about his moral egalitarianism. And there was nothing exceptional about America. I called him at the time the most anti-American president in American history, Obama. But that's only because I couldn't imagine a Trump. But Trump is very similar to Obama because Trump is anti-American. He's not, if you understand America to be the founding fathers of America. And he's against American exceptionalism, just like Obama was. In that sense, I think Trump captured a political moment. He saw that the country was basically moved away from the idea that America was special in any important regard and that he could capitalize on that. So those are the only two presidents. Biden, I don't consider Biden an enemy of American exceptionalism. I consider Biden a zero. So I don't think Biden he doesn't think America's exceptional, doesn't think it's not exceptional. I don't think he thinks. I don't think he has the mental capacity anymore to think, if he ever did. So he's just a zero, and I think his presidency is one big zero, and that's why everything in Washington is not being dictated by Trump. It's by Biden, by the people around him. They run policy, they run everything, and he's just a yes man or a rubber stamp, I think, to give it kind of presidential aura. But there's no there. Whereas with Trump, he was constantly fighting with his advisors, and what you got was Trump. Sometimes his advisors won, and sometimes it was Trump, but for the most part it was Trump. And with Obama, I do think Obama was a leader, so I do think he led his advisors. With Biden, is just a follower. Always has been throughout his career. I don't think he's ever had an original thought. So 9/11 has really shaped the self-esteem of America. It shaped our attitude towards ourselves, our role in the world, the value we see in our own country, and its value to us and its value from a foreign policy perspective. It shaped our attitude towards our politicians and to some extent towards our intellectuals, our elites, the people who kind of dictate kind of the terms of the culture. And it is eliminated any kind of confidence we have in our ability to overcome. I think the second big event in the 21st century was the financial crisis, and I'll leave that for another time. I think I've talked about that quite a bit and how that changed our attitude towards capitalism and markets and freedom, and that really. But that and 9/11 were the two events that really are going to shape the 21st century. COVID is just going to reinforce all those trends, but it has seriously dumbed us down, caused us to have this really deep held mistrust of everybody out there, a mistrust that is justified. Why would we trust our politicians given how much they've screwed up over the last 50 to 100 years, but certainly over the last 21, 22 years. It's been a complete and utter disaster. And everybody knows it. Like, there were disasters in the past, but it wasn't quite as easy to pinpoint who did it. Here we know exactly who did it. And maybe it's implicit, maybe we don't recognize it fully, but I think it's now an embedded part of the culture. I think also 9/11 was also a time whereas initially in the first month or two, everybody was patriotic, everybody supported George Bush, his ratings went through the roof. By the time even of the election in 2004, and certainly in his second term, the country started really splitting and tearing apart. There really started to be this approach of, and I saw it on the right, particularly on the right, there was this approach of, you cannot criticize Bush. If you criticize Bush, you're basically committing treason. We're fighting a war. You don't criticize the commander-in-chief during a war. And if you do, you're just in league with the New York Times. And I remember people saying that to me in the early 2000s, exactly like they said it to me during Trump's stuff when I used to criticize Trump. Oh, you're just part of the mainstream media. You're just a New York Times guy. It's the same pattern. And I think after 9/11 was the first time I observed this, particularly on the right, of this, you cannot criticize their sacred cows, and if you are, you're just lumped in together with all the leftists. No nuance, no ability to differentiate. And I would say to them, I was still naive in those days, no, the most important critique of Bush is from the right. I think he's a wimp. Right? My critique is he's too wimpy. He's too, and it's important to critique him from the right. No, I mean, no matter what the critique is, doesn't matter. It's the criticizing, and that's when I first sensed the authoritarian nature. I mean, Bush for a while there could have done anything, and certainly in the Republican Party they would have followed him, no matter what he proposed or what he engineered. So there was definitely this authoritarian sense. There was definitely this attitude that no criticism allowed. The left is the enemy. Those guys are the enemy. And that, I think, throughout Bush's administration got worse and worse and worse. And then Obama Obama, I think, segmented the country even deeper. You got the Tea Party, and which started out, I think, as a positive movement, but turned out to be more more movement about hating the other side than it was about actually understanding and loving America. And it morphed into the Trump movement. So, and by then, I mean, I'm still shocked, and I certainly was shocked in 2016, the depth to which the right hates the left and the left hates the right. I think I said this on the other day on the show that I first figured out the extent to which the left hated the right when in that scene in Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Larry David is about to have sex with this amazing, sexy woman, and he notices on her, on a shelf there, a picture of George Bush, and he goes, "You're a Republican," and that was it. No sex. No, she was no longer attractive. There was nothing was happening, and that, I mean, really, politics is more important than sex. I mean, that was a shock to me. I didn't know there were people who held that view. So it's become our tribalism. Again, everything has its roots way back, and everything ultimately is determined by ideas. But what we have today is that the ideas that are determining us are not specific political ideas. The ideas that are determining us, ideas about epistemology and metaphysics, ideas about where truth comes from, and what is reality, and the role of reason. And those ideas are the bad ideas. And those ideas don't lead to one specific outcome. What those ideas lead to is the mess we're in today. So the same ideas are leading the right to be the right and the left to be the left. They're both mystics. The same ideas about where this truth comes from are leading the left to be the left and the right to be the right. So it's the same, in a sense, complete and utter relativism, subjectivism, which I think religion is, that impacts all of them, which is leading to where we are. Today. So when people think about ideas shape history, it's not like this particular idea in politics leads to these things. It's the fundamental ideas about morality, epistemology, and metaphysics that drive us, and then there's a million different variations of wrong. There's only one variation of right, and a million variations of wrong. I think Aristotle said that. There's only one path to virtue, one path to the truth, and many paths to falsehood. And we see that in our politics. The bad ideas have infected everybody, and pretty much every alternative out there is a bad idea. But so much of it is the seeds were planted, if you will, existentially in 9/11, and so much of our culture. And Leonard Peikoff gave a talk, I think it was 2004, Americans versus America, right? And the idea there was powerful talk. I encourage everybody. Is maybe 2000. It was just on the eve of the invasion of Iraq, so maybe it was 2003. And it was American sense of life is gone. What Americans are doing, Americans are fighting America, the idea of America, the principle of America. And he was so right. He was so right. And you're seeing that play out over the 20 years that have followed that. You're really seeing it all play out. And so today, nobody even knows what America is. There's no conception of America out there. Not right, not left. Used to be some conservatives had some vague idea about the Founding Fathers and had some understanding of it. But, as I discussed about the Supreme Court, they don't understand the Constitution. And certainly our politicians don't understand the Constitution or the principles on which this country was founded. All right, let's see where we are. So yes, so as I said, I think 9/11 is key. So we don't have a lot of Super Chat questions, so I don't know if you guys are waiting still to ask. We have a decent number of people online listening live, but very few people asking questions. So hopefully we'll get a few additional ones, and we can also take live questions if anybody wants to ask them here. Leah, let's start with Alex. Alex asked, let me just press that start. I was politically aware by 2001. I remember many conservatives at the time were big on calling out Islam and critical of those who wouldn't. I don't think it's fair to only credit objectivists for being aware of this truth. Yes, there were some conservatives who called it out. I mentioned Daniel Pipes, but there were quite a few others. And then there were the ones who wanted to blame Islam for everything. That is, instead of blaming the particular interpretation of Islam that was unique to the jihadis, they wanted to blame Islam more broadly. Again, Daniel Pipes was not one of those. I like Daniel Pipes because he kept the right balance. But note that a Republican administration led by what was considered at the time a tough guy, with a tough Secretary of Defense, what was his name, Rumsfeld, and the ultimate, supposedly, he's not a neoconservative, but supposedly a neoconservative, and Dick Cheney, right? Dick Cheney. All these people refused to name Islam. So yes, you had a few conservative intellectuals here and there who were willing to call it radical Islam or something like that. But at the end of the day, they were on the fringes. They were not the mainstream. And the mainstream on the right was afraid to call it what it was. And certainly the mainstream media, certainly much of the media. And look, those conservatives, maybe they were willing to call it some variation on Islam, but then they supported the Iraq War with no real explanation and no real reason. Or they supported bringing democracy to Afghanistan, which makes like zero sense if you want to bring democracy to Afghanistan. They completely bought into the rules of engagement. Nobody criticized. That's one thing I could say. I was one of the only person. There was another guy who did it, the Catholic, Angelo Cudavilla, who is a Catholic intellectual, who also was the only other guy who criticized the rules of engagement. But you had the ridiculous, pathetic, weak rules of engagement that nobody seemed to really challenge. So yes, it's true. Other people blamed aspects of Islam for this, but almost nobody went all the way in terms of, I think, what was uniquely an objectivist view of the wars, the way they were prosecuted, and who the enemy accurately was. I think that was uniquely objectivist, and you can read it in Winning the Unwinnable War, the book that Ilan Journo edited, and it's got 3 essays that I'm a co-author in that book. I think one with Alex Epstein, maybe 2 with Ilan, or 2 with Alex Epstein, and 1 with Ilan, something like that. I can't remember. So yes, there were some conservatives, but they lost focus on the war. They lost focus on what was happening. One of the really sad things about what's happened in the last 20 years is what happened in Afghanistan. About 2 years ago, there was this big report in the Washington Post, and it ultimately was turned into a book, detailing interviews with all the people, kind of the generals, the politicians, the diplomats, the people in Afghanistan, the people about the Afghan war. And it turns out quite clearly that the American people were lied to over and over and over again, that the generals and everybody else knew that from their perspective, the war was not winnable. From their perspective, just a matter of time before they had to evacuate, and there was no reason to be there. There was no purpose to it. Just a waste of human beings and a waste of money, and just a disaster from beginning to end. And it came out, and it should have caused a massive outrage, and it should have caused for demand, I think, to prosecute some of these people. Some of these people lied so blatantly and committed American to strategies that's so harmful to American interest and to the lives of Americans, that something real should have happened to them, something damaging should have happened to them. And the American people basically shrugged and went on with life. There was nothing. The book didn't sell. The articles in the Washington Post. They thought it was going to be like the papers, the Pentagon Papers in the early 1970s, revealing the horrors of the Vietnam War. None of that happened. Nobody cared. And it was truly stunning that for 20 years, these people knew exactly what was going on. These people knew that what they were doing was not effective, not resulting in anything, and they were just lying to the American people consistently. And then add insult to injury, the American people don't care to be lied, if they're lied to or not. They don't care about the outcome of all of this. And the kids who died for nothing, which is heart-wrenching. All right, Liam. Liam says, in 50 years, even if objectivism hasn't changed the culture, everyone will know its name. Yes, I think that's right. I'm hoping that happens in less than 50 years, that everybody knows its name. Landon, and we've only got like 2 or 3 more questions, so we'll have the show will be short today unless we get more questions. That culture has infected everything. My boss, Senior VP of Data Sciences, late 50s MIT, refuses to possibly offend any business stakeholder. It's not possible to do one's job and not offend anybody. Yes, and that idea is antagonistic to proper business practices. It's antagonistic to a proper work environment. It's antagonistic to proper studying. People have got to be offended, and they've got to have a spine and deal with it and handle it. To create an environment in which nobody's affected, nobody's offended, is to create an environment where nobody speaks the truth. It's to create an environment where everybody's walking on eggshells. It's creating an environment where nobody innovates, nobody speaks about anything out of the box, where nobody's broadening their horizons. Every new idea, every new product, every new company is offensive to somebody. I like to say Uber is offensive to taxi cab drivers. Right? Newton was offensive to a lot of people who had alternative theories of how the world worked. There were lots of scientists trying, and he offended them all. Darwin offended every major religion on planet Earth. The truth is offensive. It really is. It's part of how you know it's the truth. So this idea of walking on eggshells, of self-censorship, is one of the most horrible ideas out there. So truly tragic. Right. Answered. Chandler's here in the audience, live. Ideas for boosting live audience numbers. I mean, here's the ideas of boosting. I mean, we're up to 94, which is not bad, given that we didn't really announce this in advance, and it's 4:30 in the afternoon and all that, so it's not bad. But here are the ideas. I mean, the kind of things that are boost live audience are pretty obvious. They're just hard to implement for me. Have the shows on a schedule, regular schedule, so people know there's going to be a show on, because it's Thursday at 8 p.m., and there's always a show on Thursday at 8 p.m., and so Euron has to get into a regular schedule and can't just make up shows whenever he wants to. That's one way to boost it. The more regular you become, the more you become kind of a pattern of somebody's behavior. What else? So regular shows. Advertise them well in advance. So, if you go up on Twitter 5 minutes before the show, you're going to get less people live than if you start advertising 3 hours before and people join over time. Advertise. Advertising is definitely, you get what you pay for, and if you pay to advertise, you get a return on that advertising. Have sexy titles. I'm terrible with titles. I have the most boring titles. But then other people have fancy titles that are so fancy they're intimidating. You have to find the right balance where the title is intriguing, but not so mysterious as nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. It has to be intriguing, but so sexy titles are really, really important, and I am so bad at coming up with sexy titles. I had a guy who helped me with marketing a few years ago who actually did really good titles, and there was definitely a bump in the live audience. So I need to come up with good titles, but that's not me. I'm not good at those things. I don't do sexy titles. What else? Those are 4. Regular schedule, market in advance, sexy titles. I had at least one other one. Nobody on the chat has any real big ideas. Just right, culture war as the titles. And you get all conservatives. Yeah, but then I don't get conservatives. Then I get the racists, the crazies. So I want more people listening, but not necessarily the nut jobs listening. I don't think that benefits the world because I don't think I can convince any of them of anything. Landon says, bring sexy back. When did I ever have it? Good question. Get a secretary. I've got a secretary. What does getting a secretary have to do with this? Chandler says, a sexy secretary. God. What will my wife say if I got a sexy secretary? Yeah, no. You guys are not being very helpful. So yeah, you guys tell me what I need to do to get more of a live audience. You're the live audience. You know what it takes for you to actually show up or not show up and actually learn pole dancing. I think if I learned pole dancing, the number of live people in the show would go down, not up. I don't think anybody actually wants to see me pole dance. Maybe once, because it would be funny. But after that, it would just be sad. Sexy secretary titles. I don't even know where to take that. I should do a sex lexicon. Oh, people have really got onto this one. Chandler, it's all your fault. Chandler started this. All right, we've got a, let's see, we've got a $20 question from Eric. An idea, a page where we can suggest topics for sponsored episodes and or donate topics towards specific topics. If a topic gets $1,000, we get an episode on it. If not, not. Either way, you keep all donations as support for the show. Yeah, I like the either way. I keep all donations. That's a good idea. I'll keep that idea. I'll see who can operate. Somebody needs to operationalize that for me. Maybe. Yeah. I'm sure that should be an easy programming little thing that we could do. All right. We'll have to work on that. All right, for $50. Thomas, where are you? Why aren't you here, Thomas? Like you're at the conference. Why aren't you here at the Q&A? All right, so Thomas says, I don't agree with the, let me just press the start. I don't agree with the restrictions placed on our soldiers in recent wars. But don't there have to be some code, some set of rules of conduct for our soldiers, such as not raping, looting, wanton killing, etc., enforced by military justice? Yes, absolutely. But those have to be within the context of winning. That is, the soldiers are allowed to do whatever is necessary to win. I don't think it's ever necessary to rape and pillage to win. It's often necessary to kill civilians to win, so you kill civilians to win. But the standard is the purpose. The purpose is victory. The purpose is defeating the enemy. And that should guide what is allowed and what is not allowed. Right? The other thing that has to play into this is morale. Right? If soldiers are, as happened periodically in Vietnam, murdering civilians for no reason, doing horrible things, that destroys the capacity. It's basically anarchy. It's complete dissolving of kind of military law and military unity. So within those frameworks, morale, chain of command, everything is guided by the purpose, and the purpose is victory. And if they're behaving in ways that are not leading to victory, or they're behaving in ways that goes against their commands, and they're engaged in ways that are unhuman, that is, again, remember, you're an army that represents freedom, that represents morality, that represents liberty. rape it cannot fit with that image. So, of course, raping, pillaging, looting, all of that, wanton killing should be absolutely barred. But the kind of stuff that was done during Iraq was you had to get, you had to identify the shooter before shooting back, and identify that there were not civilians around before shooting back. Helicopters had to leave their protected cover and expose themselves in order to identify their target and make sure they weren't shooting any civilians. No anything like carpet bombing, no indiscriminate bombing, everything precision, even when precision was not the most effective way to deal with the target, even in precision wasn't the best way to discourage the enemy and demotivate the enemy. And a lot of war is psychology, and a lot of cultural change is psychology. And sometimes, it's not clear that there was any military reason to flatten Dresden. And the reason Churchill supported the flattening of Dresden was to basically an issue of morale. It's to destroy German morale. And that's a legitimate reason to do it. It wouldn't be a reason to rape, pillage, loot, and wantonly kill randomly, by soldiers. There has to be a purpose. All right, Shazbat, who's here. Why didn't conservative criticize Bush for failing to prevent the second tower from getting hit on 9/11? They should want a president who is decisive and tough. I'm not sure what he could have done to prevent the second tower from being hit. It was minutes between the two. The only way to prevent it would have been to shoot down the airplane. I don't think that enough people understood when the first plane hit that it was indeed terrorism, that this was an attack versus, as bizarre as it may seem, an accident. It's only when the first plane hit that everybody went, whoa, yeah, we're being attacked. And then the Air Force was given the instruction, shoot down any plane that looks like it's heading towards a civilian target, right? And Flight 93, if they hadn't stormed the cockpit, might have been shot down before it hit the Capitol. But think about shooting down a civilian airplane with all the civilian casualties. It's in a sense a last resort. So I don't think anybody Bush, they let Bush know when the first tower was hit. He was reading the story to the kindergarten or something in a school. By the time he made it to the car, driven to Air Force One, and maybe told there was another errant airplane, it was probably too late. I don't think it was practically possible. So I think that's why he wasn't criticized, because I don't think it was actually doable or anything could have changed. Lots to criticize about Bush and his speech from day one. I was critical of him. He gave that famous speech on the rubble in front of the firefighters that everybody hailed as this, and you could tell by then already that this was not going to be good. All right, Tazy, do you see any country, city in the world that represents a new kind of America, as in projects the U.S.'s original projects the U.S.'s original positive ideals? No, I don't. And it's sad, but I don't. Certainly there was a while where Hong Kong, I think, to some extent represented those. There was, I'm trying to think of anywhere else. There are these attempts at what do they call them? Independent cities, autonomous cities. There's one being built in Honduras. But it's not clear what is going to come of them and whether they'll ever really embed a spirit, other than people just wanting to get away from high taxes or just wanting to get away from living in America or living in parts of the Western world. So no, I don't think there's any place in the world right now. There are better places. There's certainly better cities. There are better countries. London, where Tessie lives, is a great city and a great place, but it doesn't really embed the American spirit, although it is a dynamic city, an energetic city, a very multicultural, not in the sense of multiculturalism, but in the sense of all people are welcome kind of place. And if you're productive and you work hard, you can be successful, that kind of city. But you know, there are not many cities in the world that project even that. And that's, yeah, except for the stabbings, but the stabbings are minor. You know, US cities are far more dangerous than London is. London is one of the safest cities certainly in the Western world. London is safer than New York, and New York is one of the safest cities in America by far. Indeed, the cities that are most truly multicultural in the sense of many peoples from many places around the world live in them tend to be the safest cities, you know, in the West. So London's an incredibly safe city. Stabbings are super rare, rarer than shootings in the U.S. Yeah, every city has places you'd rather not go to, right? Every city has tough areas where it's probably not a good idea to go to, primarily because of the drug war. Without the drug war, a lot of that would disappear. But if you look, and I did this analysis, if you look at murders per capita, compare London to American cities, if you including terrorism, it's much safer than almost any U.S. city in terms of. I think the safest city in the world is Tokyo. I think that's right. Japan generally has like no crime. You know, who knows why exactly, but part of it might, because they have like a mafia. They have a real mafia culture as part of the culture there. There really is an underground, you know, but they don't have very high rates of murder. I'm going to be in Tokyo in September, giving a couple of talks in Tokyo. All right, last question. Yeah, Cologne was awful in 2015, 2016, but it's gone. The police clamped down, ultimately. It was recognized that there was a problem. The Germans and Europeans, you know, turned a blind eye to the problem of Muslims importing their violence towards women into the area. And most of that is gone. That is, it was awful. There were, all these immigrants came in. They treated women horribly. And when some of them started spending time in jail, it stopped. The same in England. There were periods in which there were these grooming gangs, primarily Muslims, primarily from Pakistan. They were grooming little girls for sexual abuse. And it was horrible, and the police turned a blind eye for years and years and years. So they kept on doing it because they were emboldened by the fact that the police were turning a blind eye. And the police were turning a blind eye because of multiculturalism, because they didn't want to blame an ethnic group or something. But when it was finally revealed, and when the police started getting serious about it, and when people started going to jail, it makes a difference. Police make a difference. Shocking. If you actually enforce laws, if you actually prosecute people who violate laws, the violation of laws slows down. It gets reduced. So there's a lot less harassment. You haven't heard of mass harassment of women in Germany since what happened in Cologne. It wasn't just in Cologne. It was all over Germany during New Year's Eve of 2015-16. But it's mostly being taken care of. This is the point. The point about you know, people assimilating is they'll only assimilate if you hold them up to your standards, right? If you tell Muslims you can't behave this way to women, you'll go to jail if you do, then maybe they'll change their way. If you tell them, yeah, do what you want, then yeah, they're not going to change their culture. You have to demand and expect them to change their culture. You have to expect, you know, when they go to work, you have to demand that that the standards by which they work, you know, they should, things like some cultures, people don't show up on time. Well, when you go to work in the West, you show up on time. You know, things like that. You have to expect them to adapt to our culture. That's how over time they assimilate to our culture. So, you know, that behavior, while it's their fault, only happened because, you know, we tolerated it. As soon as you stop tolerating, it's gone. But, you know, somebody's arguing with me about violence in these cities. look up murder rates in London. Look up the number of people who die because of violent actions in London and compare it to any city in the United States, and you can see the difference. Same with Paris. Look up murder rates in Paris. Look up murder rates in Amsterdam and all these cities are pretty, varied. Look sexual assault. Look at rape. Now, rape is tricky because rape is defined differently in different countries, so it's hard to compare. But murder is murder, and assault is defined differently, and all these things are defined differently. But murder is pretty clear cut. You're dead or not dead, right? So that is the best way to compare crime cross-sectionally is to compare murder rates, because the other things, there's also the level of reporting. For example, some cultures, they don't report rape. Women are ashamed or embarrassed or forced to feel that way, and police don't take them seriously and treat them badly. So they don't report rates, or rates are very low. But they're not, right? It's happening. They're just not reported in them. So you have to adjust for all those things when you do this. All right, let's see. Last question from Landon. And by the way, we're way off our targets on Super Chat. So if anybody wants to just support the show at the end here, we'll probably end with Landon's question. That would be great. I'm not going to stay on until we meet our goals, because that would be way too much. But I don't expect when I'm traveling to get to the goal, to get to our normal goals. But if anybody wants to contribute to get us closer to it, that would be great. Let's see. Landon says, host debates with more political groups on show. I don't want to debate people on my show. I want to, because I don't think it brings that many new people. It's weird when it's my show to debate somebody. You feel like you've invited somebody and you have to treat them with a certain respect because you invited them over. You can't really get into it, I don't think. So I prefer to go on other people's platform and debate them, and that's where I've gotten a lot of people coming. I think the Vosh debate and some of the other debates I've done have brought a lot of people to my platform. They've increased subscribers, and I think over time they increase live. But yes, if I did debates live on my show, I'd get more live people. But my plan is to try to get a more regular schedule, although I can't do that when I travel like I'm traveling. So that's the tough part. I'm going to try to let you know more in advance. I'm going to try to do more interviews. I think people like interviews, and also breaks up the flow, and it means I don't have to come up with a topic for every show. I can just interview somebody, which is fairly easy. I will keep coming up with ideas on how to increase the live viewership. But for me, what's really important is not so much the live, although live helps with the super chat. Much more important is total viewership, and total viewership is definitely increasing of any particular shows, and we just need to increase at a higher pace. One way we could get more live viewership is if you guys, when you hear I'm going to be on, use your whatever social media platform you're on to advertise the fact that it's going to be on. So if I could get retweets, or if I could get you guys to tweet it, to put it on Facebook, to do whatever's necessary. Hey, you're on book's going to be on this. I listened to this. It's worth listening to, or whatever. That would help a lot. All right. Last show from OCON. Thanks, everybody. I will be back home on Saturday. I'm hoping, if I'm not exhausted, to do a show Saturday night. Definitely do a show on Sunday. And whoops, there's another question coming in. Yeah, Ryan has. Hi, Yaron. I do enjoy your shows where you critique another intellectual's talk or views through the objectivist lens. Thanks for all you do. Yes. So some of my most watched shows are ones where I put up a video of, I don't know, somebody, usually somebody on the left, and I critique it. I will try to do more of those. I don't know. I don't watch those shows, so send me stuff. I want to do a critique of Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris talking about morality. So that's one I've got in the pipeline they did a little interview and they talked about morality. Where's morality come from? I think that'll be interesting to do. But if you find things, videos, they don't, not long, because I speak 7 minutes for every 30 seconds that they talk. So I can't do a 30-minute video. But if you find like clips of 3 to 5 minutes of people talking about stuff that you think would be interesting for me to comment on, send it to yuron@yuronbookshow.com. Also, if there's an interesting philosopher or intellectual like Sam Harris, I don't think I've ever done a show critiquing Sam Harris. But Jordan Peterson I've done Ben Shapiro, I've done Zizek, remember Zizek? I've done Wolf. So if you find people like that, like not just people who have YouTube shows, but people who have who are intellectuals or philosophers or economists or things like that, that you think it would be good for me to critique a short segment of theirs, then send me the segments and I will do more of those. So my plan is this summer to do more of those. But the biggest challenge for the regular schedule and for doing all the things that I plan to do is somebody wants me to critique Joseph Campbell. Send me a segment of Joseph Campbell that I can do. The biggest challenge is travel schedule. All right, we got one more question. Hunter. I'm about to graduate with an accounting degree, and it seems every job I look at talks extensively about the commitment to DEI and ESG. Is this a red flag or something to be expected nowadays? Unfortunately, I think it's something to be expected. It's almost impossible to find a company that's not going to do that. You might find that company, but I wouldn't, at this point, particularly early in your career, don't make that the deciding factor of where you're going to work. Make the deciding factor what you're going to learn on the job, who you're going to be working with, the kind of projects that you're going to be engaged in, how much of a challenge it is, how much fun is it going to be. Make those the deciding factors, and how much money you're going to make. And I think later in your career, when you have more choices and maybe when these DEI and ESG are going to impact you, because now maybe you're hiring and now they're going to force you to use these criteria to hire. Maybe then they should become a much bigger part of and maybe you're now in a leadership position and now you're stuck sanctioning these because you're a senior VP and now the company has this. Then I think it can become much more of a criteria for choosing a job and deciding what to take and what not. But I mean, everybody has this. If you look at their websites, they all do this. It's ubiquitous, and you shouldn't sacrifice yourself because the world's gone crazy, right? All right, I'm looking forward. Tomorrow I'm giving a talk. Those of you who are not at OCON can live stream this. If you go to the OCON website, I think you can buy a subscription. You can buy the talk or buy a bunch of talks, and I'm talking tomorrow about why I'm still optimistic. I think by tomorrow I'll figure out why and what it is I'm optimistic about, working on it. But yes, it should be a fun talk. It's a final talk at OCON. I'm supposed to leave you in a good mood and energized and excited to go out into the world, and I will do that. Landon asked, what is DEI and ESG? Where do you live, Landon? What universe, what planet are you on that you don't know what DEI and ESG is? I think everybody wants to join you there. DEI is diversity. What's the E? I is inclusion. Equity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's the whole egalitarian. You have to hire, based on the, how oppressed they are, right? Based on the pyramid of oppression, based on how intersectional they are, what score they get on intersectionality quizzes. So it's diversity, equity, inclusion. ESG is environment, which means the company is environmentally good and safe and nice. Society, which means basically DEI, so it basically means inclusion and diversity and all those things. And then governance, which means stakeholder. We care about our stakeholders. We don't just manage for shareholders. And it also means our board is very diverse. We have lots of diverse people. God forbid we have anybody who actually cares about shareholders or one who makes money. That does not count as diversity. we have a lot of different races and a lot of different sexes, and I guess now a lot of different genders on the board of directors. So don't worry, we're all good. Thanks for asking, Landon. I'm sure there were other people who didn't know. And Hunter, good luck with the job search. And to everybody here at OCON, enjoy the rest of the conference. And I will see you all on the Your Own Book Show on, I expect Saturday, but for certain on Sunday. Bye, everybody. See you guys.